So this is my analysis of the Kite Runner, and it's called The Kite Runner from Guilt to Redemption. So what is the Kite Runner about? The Kite Runner follows the childhood of Amir, with a particular focus on the events that took place in the winter of 1975. Amir is a Pashtun who grows up in Afghanistan, a country divided by ethnic class lines and political turmoil. Hassan, Amir's closest friend, is socially inferior because of his Hazara identity, but nonetheless, the two boys are raised together and have many great adventures, particularly flying kites. However, the inherent class divisions of society undermine the boys' relationship, and their friendship is further weakened when the resident bully, Asef, and his cronies rape Hassan. Because he stood by and sacrificed Hassan to please his father, Amir is consumed with guilt and plots to send Hassan away to relieve him of the constant reminder of his lack of action. Soon after Hassan and Ali leave, Baba and Amir escape Afghanistan for the United States as the Soviets invade their homeland. Once in America, Baba and Amir rebuild their lives in an unfamiliar country while the guilt still lives on in Amir. Eventually, Amir marries Soraya, a woman carrying her own burdens, and Baba dies from cancer. Soon after, Amir goes to war-torn Afghanistan to seek redemption for what happened as a child, with the guidance of Baba's old friend Rahim Khan. In the end, Amir rescues Sarab, Hassan's son, from the Taliban and takes him back to America to live with him and his wife, ultimately extinguishing the guilt he had harbored for decades. One literary device used throughout the Kite Runner is symbolism, and one major symbol is the kite. On page 51, Amir comments that the kite fighting tournament was an old winter tradition in Afghanistan. So the kite symbolizes the blithe nature of childhood, as it brought great happiness to everyone who fought kites. When the Taliban banned kite fighting, they robbed the children of recreational fun. Ultimately, though, the kite symbolizes the guilt of Amir because he placed a greater value in keeping the kite to satisfy his father rather than protecting Hassan. Another symbol in the story is the slingshot. And on page 42, Hassan remarks, "But perhaps you didn't notice that I'm the one holding the slingshot." So the slingshot symbolizes the willingness to do what is right and protect oneself and others in the face of injustice. Both Hassan and Sarab employ their slingshots to stand up to Asef and protect Amir, as well as themselves, exemplifying their continuous loyalty and devotion. So although the two of them were deadly with their slingshots and could use it to hurt others, Hassan only threatened to use it whenever it was needed, and Sarab only used it in the worst case scenario. So another symbol is the pomegranate tree. On page 27, it says, "Amir and Hassan, the Sultans of Kabul." Those words made it formal, the tree was ours. So the pomegranate tree symbolizes the friendship between Amir and Hassan. As they were growing up, the tree flourished and served as a refuge for the two boys, as they hid out from the summer sun and read books underneath the tree. However, years after their relationship ended, Hassan remarked that the tree hadn't borne fruit in years. Although part of their friendship still remains, as can be seen in their name still carved in the tree, the lifeless, wilted nature of the tree exemplifies the loss of their friendship. Another literary device used in the book is foreshadowing. On page 2, Rahim Khan remarks that there is a way to be good again, and Amir says, "I thought of the life I had lived until the winter of 1975 came along and changed everything, and made me what I am today." Hosseini utilizes foreshadowing so early on in the story to set the stage for the rest of the novel and hint at what is to come. Because of this, the reader recognizes that Amir's life was forever changed by an adverse event that happened early in his childhood, but that he will have a chance to redeem himself and to be good again. Another instance of foreshadowing is on page 42 and 43. Asef remarks, "This doesn't end today, believe me. Someday I'll make you face me one-on-one." In this case, Hosseini uses foreshadowing to indicate that Asef and Amir's relationship is not yet over, and that they will one day meet again to finish their fight. This hints to their later confrontation in Kabul, as Amir finds that Asef is Sarab's captor and Amir must face Asef one-on-one to save Sarab and seek redemption. Finally, on page 67, Amir comments, "The next time I saw him smile unabashedly like that was 26 years later in a faded Polaroid photograph." Hosseini employs foreshadowing to clue the reader in that Hassan would no longer smile his normal smile, at least in Amir's sight, for quite a long time. This suggests that something crucial happened to Hassan, but that over time he eventually began to smile again. This also hints that Amir wouldn't see Hassan for a while because he only saw his smile through a photograph. Another literary device to use in the Kite Runner is metaphor. On page 123, Amir comments that "I only knew the memory lives in me." A perfectly encapsulated morsel of a good past, a brushstroke of color on the gray, barren canvas that our life had become. The comparison of a gray barren canvas to the lives of Amir and Baba exemplifies that the two of them left behind their past life and now have a new beginning, or blank canvas. Although their lives are dull and not as vivid as Afghanistan, Amir finds happiness and comfort in his memory of Hassan and their old relationship. Although he was responsible for the deterioration of their friendship, he misses their carefree adventures as children. On page 136, Amir also comments that America was different. America was a river roaring along, unmindful of the past. I could wade into this river, let my sins drown to the bottom, let the waters carry me someplace far. This comparison of America and a river demonstrates how Amir finds his new home to be a place where his sins are suppressed from his memory so that he doesn't have to face the past. America serves as a blank slate for Amir where he can begin his life anew, and only focus on the present and the future rather than being reminded of his guilt. Next is the use of illusion. On page 105, Amir comments, I loved him in that moment, loved him more than I'd ever loved anyone, and I wanted to tell them all that I was the snake in the grass. In this instance, the snake in the grass alludes to the serpent in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. This biblical reference demonstrates the deceptive nature of Amir, whether it be lying about the meaning of a word or framing Hassan for theft. Because of his actions, Hassan and Ali left Baba's home, similar to Adam and Eve being banished from the Garden of Eden because of the snake's influence. Another instance of illusion is on page 19, when Amir says, I read everything, Rumi, Hafez, Saadi, Victor Hugo, Jules Verne, Mark Twain, Ian Fleming. The allusion to a multitude of literary authors reveals the diversity of Amir's fancies and the influence of Western culture on Afghan culture. The authors hail from Turkey, Iran, France, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Their times range from the early 13th century to the mid-20th century. The variety of the authors' focuses exemplifies that Amir has a passion for subjects that a kid his age would normally not understand. So next is text to text. First off is clothes, and in clothes, the author explores the struggle of moving to an unfamiliar country and the identity troubles that come with it. Both Amir and Mita are in a new land, surrounded by both American culture and their own cultures. Because of this, they must blend these two cultures and forge their own identities. While Mita funnels her aspirations and sentiments into her saris, Amir turns to writing to express his feelings. They both live in two different worlds, Mita with her Indian saris and Western clothes, Amir with his education in writing and Afghan flea market. And second is the myth of devotion. So, considering the biblical allusion mentioned in the last slide, Amir bears resemblance to Hades in a myth of devotion. Both Amir and Hades are selfish and sacrifice others, in this case Hassan and Persephone, to fulfill their desires. While Hades captures Persephone and dooms her to a life in his hell, Amir expels Hassan from his home through deception. Furthermore, both characters strip innocence from another. Amir watches as Hassan is raped, letting his innocence be taken away, and Hades takes away Persephone's innocence, evident in the bed that he adds to her meadow. Next is text to world. So similar to the rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan and the Kite Runner, there are currently 12 terrorist/extremist groups in Afghanistan. As of July 2016, and the Middle East as a whole has been fraught with terrorist activities. With the rise of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, across the region, scenes like those described in the Kite Runner are an everyday reality for many. As well, Russia is continuously attempting to exert its influence in other countries, such as Ukraine and Gaza in recent years, which is similar to the Soviet invasion and occupation in the book. Ultimately, though, Amir was a bystander to Hassan's rape and merely exploits Hassan for personal gain. This is similar to how the global community abandoned Afghanistan during the Soviet invasion. So next to this setting, the first part of the book takes place in Afghanistan, specifically Kabul. Afghanistan was politically neutral during the Cold War but sought a closer relationship to the Soviet Union and distanced itself from Pakistan right before the Soviet invasion. The country itself is dry, mountainous, and landlocked, which makes it dependent on surrounding countries for resources. As well, the population is ethnically, linguistically, and religiously diverse, but they're divided by group identities, such as the Pashtuns and the Hazaras, that can be seen in the book. Politically, Afghanistan was highly unsafe after the Soviet withdrawal because of rival militias and because there was no established government yet. Because of this, there was a provisional government in place until 2004. Next, we move on to the United States, specifically Fremont, California, where Amir and Baba move after fleeing from Afghanistan. In California, it's a mild Mediterranean climate, and because of this, The 1980s saw a large migration of young working-age Americans and affluent retirees to the Sun Belt. During the time that Amir and Baba lived in the United States, the Cold War was going on, but it finally ended in 1991. And because of this, George Bush advocated for the New World Order, in which there was a world free from the threat of terror, strong pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. With this in mind, the United States became the world's dominant military power, and there was quite a bit of military involvement in the Middle East. As well, there were a few instances of domestic terrorism, but the major event was 9/11, and after 9/11, the United States invaded Afghanistan and overthrew the Taliban. So overall, the United States and Afghanistan during this time period were fairly different because Afghanistan's government was fairly unstable while the United States had a pretty secure government. As well, Afghanistan had a rigid class structure based on religion and ethnicity, while the United States was pretty much a free-for-all and fairly individualistic. On the other hand, there were a few similarities. They were both pretty diverse, although the United States was more diverse than Afghanistan. And neither were safe from terrorism because Afghanistan was just bombarded by terrorist groups, while the United States had a few more secluded incidents, but they still felt the wrath of terrorism. So next are my favorite quotations. The first one was on page 36, and it said, "The generation of Afghan children whose ears would know nothing but the sounds of bombs and gunfire was not yet born." So I really love this quote because it's tremendously insightful, and I've never heard anything like this. Like, it really makes you think about the emotional aspect and what these people actually go through. Because it's easy to see it on the news and just think of all of the numbers and see the faces on TV, but not really think about the effects and what they're going through. But this quote humanized it and made me realize how lucky people who don't grow up in war and just the average public in general, how lucky they are. So my next favorite quote was on page 22, and I think Raheem Khan said, "Children aren't coloring books. You don't get to fill them with your favorite colors." What I liked about this quote was how it argues that some things are out of one's control and you can't mold someone to be who you want them to be. You just have to accept them and just watch them as they grow. As well, I found it kind of ironic and contrary to the last part of the book, because in the last part, when Amir went back to Afghanistan to go visit, he just saw the children and they didn't have families and they were alone and not in a good place. They were just not even children. I think there was some part of the book that said that they were child without childhoods or something along those lines. And I found the juxtaposition between before war and after war, the differences in taking care of children, quite surprising, because during the war, there was essentially no such thing as parenting, and children were just left to fend for themselves. So moving on, the next quote that I liked was on page 115, and Baba said, "War doesn't negate decency, it demands it, even more than in times of peace." So I really loved how, in the face of a detestable person who held all of the power, Baba advocated for respect and compassion amidst an environment that rarely has it. So decency and war rarely go together, and I love how the idea of actually being human and not losing your humanity when you're fighting against an enemy and just losing sight of who you are, I found that really insightful. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So moving on to the next one, on page 371, Amir says, "For you 1,000 times over," I heard myself say. And the reason I love this is that it brought the story around full circle, and it demonstrates how far Amir has come throughout the book, and how immensely he's changed, and he isn't as selfish as he was when he first started out. So the book just follows his progression as he gets older and learns from his mistakes, and I love how this just brings it back, and you just really get the perspective from the whole book with this quote. Okay, so moving on, unique discoveries.